I rise to conclude the debate on the bill that is shortly entitled Nevis Appropriation 2024 Bill 2023, and to try and pull the various strands together. I propose not to be unduly prolix, but certainly I think the debate thus far has been an excellent debate, and I would want to thank all the members on the government side whom in my view reported in a fulsome way on their ministries. I believe all except the Minister of Education asked for additional time, and so they were able to speak to the various matters for which they're responsible and to give an update. And I think the update has been an excellent update. The good member for number 3 and Deputy Premier has just taken his seat, and I think it was a tour de force in terms of a report to us, in terms of the work that is being done, and the admonition to the opposition and to persons who continue to decry and call down this land that we all love. It is always a strange thing when we covet something, but our approach to that something is to degrade it. That's odd. We see a beautiful young lady that we like, but perhaps because she doesn't like us, we start to say all kind of man of evil about her. It is a curious human phenomenon. And just to add a half of a point to what the honorable member for number 3 said, I reflect that we had a famous black actress here called Nia Long. And Nia put on Instagram, "My heart belongs to Nevis." Imagine that. My heart belongs to Nevis. She has 4.4 million followers on Instagram. That's what she said to her followers. We couldn't afford to buy that level of publicity, Madam President. And when I reference that Nia who had come, seen, and was so moved by what she saw, none to do with the government. It's the people at Four Seasons where she stayed, the staff, people from Jessup and Barnesgut and Cotton Ground and Hanley's Road and Brownhill, who she interacted with, that drew her to the conclusion that she was willing to say to the world, her heart belongs to this little island. But who tell me say that Nia Long says so? I see some opposition people took to social media, Lord, when they were finished with poor Miss Long. You would think Miss Long... Huh?
She called Miss Short.
She called Miss Tiny? They went after her in the worst way. What was her sin? What was her sin? She said her heart belongs to Nevis. And the opposition blew moderation Rex because somebody had something good to say about the island that they say they love and the island that they say they want to manage. Somebody came and said something good. That was their sin. The good Senator and Minister of Health spoke to a young lady, called her name, Africa Wilkes, my good friend, and spoke about a program which is the assistance for parents and daycare. And it was the honorable member for number 1 and I who were in the Hamilton area doing a little bit of a listening tour, if you will. And Africa was very passionate. She spoke about the difficulty she had as a single mother with children who needed daycare, Madam President. And when she laid out the cost, because you know I out of the daycare business long time. So when she laid out the cost of daycare and she compared it to what she was earning, the gravity of the problem was immediately obvious. If you have 2 children in daycare and you're working minimum wage, you can't survive. And she made the case, and we made a commitment. In fact, it was in the manifesto that we published, that we would seek to do something in relation to daycare. When the cabinet was formed and the idea was thrown out, the good minister, young minister here, full of ideas, she and her team, an excellent team, We had one approach. She came back and she said she had a better approach. And the cabinet said, you know what? Indeed, that is a better approach. Because initially we were going to build a daycare facility and staff it and do all of those things. And the minister came back and she said, that will compete with the private daycares. So instead of doing that and creating yet another government department, why not identify the people that need assistance and provide a voucher for them? And that is exactly what we did. So when the program was launched, Young Africa, who I can say was the architect in a way, because it was her passionate plea and her explanation of the circumstances that led us to make the commitment. So she came and she spoke, and she had the audacity to say thank you, that it was a good idea. And oh my goodness, an answerness rise up. How dare this division, who came to a government with an idea and lived long enough to see that idea bear fruit, implemented for her benefit and not just for her. Because the thing that I marveled at, Africa never once came and said, I want this for me. She spoke for all people who she thought needed that assistance. But Africa made the cardinal mistake of saying publicly, 28 people are now benefiting. You see, we get up-to-date reports, live. 28 people, 28 families are benefiting from this program. Africa made the mistake of saying thank you in public. And she called me, she messaged me, she said, Lord of mercy. Number of people cussing her. Why? Something good. We have this thing here happening in Nevis now, where you drive on a brand new road, but yet you say, nothing has happened. The good member for number 4 came in here, and she struggled. Everybody could see she was struggling. I believe the last time she was here, she spoke for about an hour. This time, I was of the view that she wanted to make up time. So she dithered and struggled and said a couple things 3 and 4 times. One of the things she said, which I marveled at, she said to us, the honorable member said to us, that everything the private sector does, the government wants to take credit. She gave some story about some telemachine at Pinnis. And I smiled when the good member said what she said. You know why I smiled, Madam President? One of the talking points in the opposition for years has been that we have no investors in Nevis. But they said the investors are out at sea. That's one of the talking points. So inherent in that talking point is certainly an appreciation by the members of the opposition that the government has a role to play in attracting investment. But that is governance 101. We don't need no degree to understand that. And what I find is interesting is when the investors do come and invest, the same people who say there are no investors and the government is not attracting them turns around and say the government shouldn't take no credit. Well, if you're going to beat up the government about the lack of investment, well, it follows that the government ought to get some credit when investors come. And what we have been describing, Madam President, is quite clear. That investors have come, investors continue to come, and the job numbers reflect it. They reflect it. I just want to go to the budget address briefly. We had a whole section, let me see if I can find it, that spoke about jobs and job creation. At 42, paragraph 42. It speaks to the fact. In fact, let me go back. Let me start at paragraph 39. It says, during the period December 2020 to July 2023, there has been a 28% increase in the average number of jobs on the island of Nevis. A significant portion of that growth is in the tourism sector, which moved from 661 jobs in 2020, naturally the COVID period, to 1,234 jobs at the close of fiscal year 2022. And we are already up to that level for the third quarter of 2023, and we know we're only now moving into the tourism season. The numbers from Social Security are clear that up to July 31st, 2023, we had 5,534 persons employed, which is already ahead of the 2020 and 2021 outcomes. The average number of jobs on Nevis at paragraph 41 as of July 2023 stood at 5,965. More jobs than we had in the whole of 2020. And more jobs than we had in the whole of 2021. And on par with what we saw in 2022. There was also this issue of surplus jobs, and I want to go back to it because I made the point, but I'm not certain, based on the response from the member for number 4, that she understood the point that was being made. If it is, Madam President, that Social Security statistics are saying that there are 6,000 jobs, just using numbers as a reference, but that at the same time there are only 5,500 employees registered. They're saying that there is a gap between the number of jobs and the number of workers. It's a good position to be in. And that gap, they're saying, has been filled because some workers decide they want to do more than one job. And the response that we have had from the member opposite, rather than looking at the figures and saying, well, this is a clear indication that the economy is growing and that we're moving in the right direction, the response is that, oh, well, people not making money, that is why they have to work 2 jobs, because if people were getting enough money from just one job, they would not work anymore. That might be the rationale and the thinking of the member opposite. But she cannot speak for everyone. People have their ambitions. Some people love to work. Madam President, I'm going to share a little story. There was a point when I had a little construction company. Don't ask me anything about construction, but I did have a company. And we had a particular job that we were doing. And the owner of the project said to us that if we were able to complete the project within a prescribed period, he would pay us a bonus. So we sat down and we worked out the math. And we said, you know what, we're going to work 7 days a week. 7. And we worked 7 days a week on that project. One chap, he wasn't from here, he was from Guyana. I said to him one day, I said, you know, after about 3 months of working 7 days per week, I said to him, I said, you know, come, I need to speak to you. I said, I'm concerned that you're not getting any break at all, and that 7 days a week for 3 months, you need to take a little time off. The fella looked at me, and he said to me, he said, Mr. Brantley, you know what my only regret is? When I asked him what, he said, my only regret is the week doesn't have 8 days. I want us to reflect on that. Where I am concerned, I'm telling him he should be taking a little time off. He's telling me his regret is that he can't work an extra day. He said his only regret is the week don't have 8 days because he come to make money. So this notion that, oh, if you can make whatever the job, that means you will not take another job. That is not the case for everybody. I went to a restaurant.
And if people have to jobs, that means jobs available.
But jobs are available. The statistics show that jobs are available. I was at a restaurant the other evening and I saw a particular young lady. And I said to her, and I had to, I said, well, how many jobs do you have? Because I had been to 2 other establishments during that week, and I saw her at both of those working. This was a 3rd establishment. I went to a place for dinner, and she was there. And I said, well, how many jobs you have? She started to laugh. And she said to me that she's just bought a house, she's bought a car, and she's trying to build a business. So she is going out there taking advantage of the economic opportunities on Nevis in order to build herself as quickly as she can. And I pursued the conversation with her. She's not from here. She comes from elsewhere. And she said to me, she said, you know, Mr. Brantley, Nevis is a blessed place. I said, why do you say that? And she said, she was actually in university back in her country. And she left university in order to travel to Nevis. And she said it's the best decision she has ever taken. And I said, how could that be? Why did you not finish school? She said, even with a university degree in her country of origin, she could not have achieved a quarter of what she has achieved in Nevis thus far. Imagine that. This place where them say so bad. Imagine that. And that, you see, Madam President, is the difference between some who say they love Nevis and people who genuinely love Nevis. And the point has been made, but I think it bears repetition. People are not rushing into any country or any territory which doesn't have opportunity. Can't happen. It will never happen. People move to where they see opportunity. I have some non-nationals in my constituency, and sometimes when I engage with them, is grandpa, grandma, uncle, cousin, children, grandchildren, everybody in their family is now here. And I said, well, how did that happen? They said, well, I came and realized the opportunity, so I sent. Just the way we used to do it, you know, Madam President. Many of us left here, that so-called Windrush generation went to England. The men usually went first. Then they get a little money, they send for their wife. They send for their children. People moved because they saw opportunity.
That's right.
That's why they moved. They saw opportunity. And then when I spoke to those members in my constituency, it turned out, you see, that it wasn't only their family, you know. I keep asking them the question, well, how come most of you are from the same area? And you know what they tell me? Well, when I don't bring my family, I send them and tell my neighbor. So if you were to do an analysis here, you find, for example, a lot of the people from the Dominican Republic, our brothers and sisters who have come home, they nearly all come from a place called San Pedro de Macorís. Nearly all of them come from that place. Because they say that's where our people went to cut cane back in the day. So talk to them. San Pedro, San Pedro, San Pedro. All of them are from San Pedro because they tell each other something good is happening in Nevis. You look at the Guyanese community that is here, and the large percentage of them come from Berbice. It's not an accident, you know. What happens with every pattern of migration anywhere in the world? People go, they find family, friends, people they went to school with, and then they develop a critical mass. That's how migration the world over works. And when we can see Nevis King Miko did the song. He said, Nevis nice.
Nice.
And I can't understand why anybody would be so intent on castigating this, the land of our birth. Because wherever I go, Nevis is me and I'm Nevis. And that is how it should be. Now, I shall not try to address every single point that was raised by the honorable member opposite. She said, for example, that there was not enough emphasis, and I'm paraphrasing, on climate change. But again, when you look at the budget address, there's a whole section referring to our efforts in terms of renewable energy, which is a response on our part to climate change. She raised the issue of the pension for any workers, something that I believe is a signature and signal achievement of this government. You know why? Any workers, non-established workers, when they came to me and talked to me in the byways and highways, and they say, Madam President, Lord, I work for 40 years and I go home with my 2 long hands. That's what we met. This government, as constituted, didn't create that system. But there was nothing in place for them. And we sat, we put a committee in place, we did our analysis. And we are very proud that we are able to now offer them something. But again, there is no capacity in the opposition to say this is a good thing, it benefits people. So, the good member for number 4 comes to say that people are being forced to retire early. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? The public service, for example, has a rule that you retire at 55. And then it says that you can get a maximum of 5 extensions, 1 year at a time. And then when the law was changed, it says now that you must retire at 62. So it increased the age to 60. That's the law. Truth be told. And we have heard about all the graduations that we've had. Well, if people are not leaving the system, well, how are people going to be added to the system? That is why you see, you know, the public service, and you see it in the budget, the wage bill keeps getting larger and larger and larger because you keep adding people and people aren't leaving. It's a natural progression, Madam President. And it is not as if we're asking people to leave empty-handed anymore. When the cabinet considered this, the cabinet said, we will hold on requiring anybody to proceed to retirement until such time as the pension scheme is in place. So anybody now who is leaving this government has the capacity, once they qualify, to leave with something in their hand and the guarantee of something every month. This has nothing to do with Social Security, you know, Madam President. Right. This is in addition to whatever they may be getting from Social Security. What in that can any person who loves people criticize? What is there to criticize about that? It is not contributory. So it means no money is being deducted from them to contribute to this. It is a government program designed to give people a greater level of comfort in the winter of their years. And we had some persons who were well into their 60s, some who were into their 70s. And they were holding on. You know why some of them were holding on? Because under the old system, they had nothing to look forward to. And so the little money that they made every week or every month was their sustenance. We are now telling them, listen, we are going to provide for your pension. And you're going to get something every month. And so you're not going away empty-handed anymore like the old days. That is something that opposition and government alike should celebrate. It is about helping people. And we are not picking out everybody. Even some of them who are the harshest critics of this government are benefiting the same. Everybody is benefiting. I asked for some statistics, because I think it's important. And I'm told that thus far, we have had some 22 persons who have left since July of 2023, the end of July, and we have another 28 scheduled to leave as of December 2023, the end of December, the end of this month. And thus far, Madam President, I want to read into the record that we have paid out $959,864.94 as gratuity to these individuals. And thus far, we have paid a total of $124,304.11 in pension. We heard the suggestion that, oh, some people couldn't get their money. These are real figures. And yes, there are some people who are still being processed. But the explanation that I've had is that, one, we said that people will be processed within 3 months. And two, some have been slow to provide the information. That is the situation. There is nothing sinister afoot. We are not a government that puts something in place to help people and then turn around and try and frustrate the same people. It's we put the program in place. So I just want to make that very clear. That so far, 22 and 28, how much is that, 50? 50 persons. 22 already collecting. We've paid out $959,864.94 in gratuity, and thus far, $124,304.11 in pension. And I believe that that is an important fact, Madam President, for this honorable House. We know that there was a call center operated in Brownhill. And we also know that the call center closed down. It was a very cruel blow for us because I recall at the time Four Seasons was also closed. And I remember being in the office on a Friday and the call came that the call center was closing the same day. We were criticized because, of course, that is the nature of the politics. But we never relented in our efforts to find a replacement. We were very close. In fact, I've told a story that we had someone from Pennsylvania, I think. And that person was actually en route to Nevis. They were at Miami International Airport in transit to come to sign up for the call center operation in Brownhill. And the person called me from the airport and asked me if they should still come. The reason for that was that we were experiencing our first cases of COVID. This was back in March, if I recall, of 2020. And I told them it made no sense for them to come because we couldn't guarantee that they would get back out, or the borders were likely to be closed. And so the person went back. It was either Pennsylvania or Philadelphia, forgive me. I get confused sometimes, but one of those. The person went back to where they were coming from. When COVID was over, I called them up and they said they no longer had an interest because their business had changed so much during COVID, they no longer had an interest. That's the way it is sometimes. But we never gave up hope. I want to thank Tamika Lawrence at the Nevis Investment Promotion Agency, Prominent Secretary, Colin Doe, and the entire team. And why do I say that? It's because they actively went out and we have been actively seeking. They said investors out to sea, we out to sea too, trying to bring them in. And we found a company called Radius. Radius operates centers in Jamaica and I believe Panama. And Radius agreed to come and to occupy at Brownhill. The plan for them is to grow. And we have seen in the budget presentation that they expect to grow to, I believe they said 180 in the next 12 months. Employees, that is. Interestingly enough, we told them you have a lot of school leavers and people like those who no doubt are looking for some work. You won't have a problem. And then guess what happened? They had job free and they had all kind of things. They end up having a problem finding employees. So, we had jobs that were not being filled because companies could not find people. Whilst we were finalizing matters with Radius, another long-time visitor to Nevis came forward. Said they have a company called Telemed, and they want to provide a different type of call center operation, smaller. And they said to us, how can we partner with them? And we did. We offered tax concessions, we offered various fiscal incentives so that they can set up and they can operate, certainly in the immediate term, without any imposition of tax. Standard tools that any government uses to attract investment. And they've set up. Last we heard they had 14 workers, and they think they're going to be up to 40 in another 12 months. 40 plus 180 in 12 months, that's 220 people working in that call center area. That is what we have been up to. When investors come, investors want to engage. And nobody invests, Madam President. None of us, locally, nobody internationally, unless they have a word. Another word is confidence. Confidence. If people come to Nevis and they say Nevis is unsafe, it is volatile, it is unstable, they don't have confidence. Nobody's going to invest any money here. The only people who invest in place of conflict is them who benefit from conflict. Investors want confidence. And so every investor that comes, large or small, every local person that invests, we celebrate them because we recognize that it is a statement by that investor that I have confidence in what I'm seeing happening on the island of Nevis. People open restaurants, call center, whatever it may be. In fact, when we look at the explosion in home construction, both through the NHLDC and what the Minister for Number 1 has described in terms of planning and the work that planning has been doing, we see that even our local people are saying we have confidence in the economy. We're going out to build a house. You know how much money it costs to build a house? It is the biggest single investment that most people ever make in their life. And when we look across the landscape and we see so many, particularly our young people, willing to invest, willing to take the plunge, we know that that is a demonstration of their confidence in what they're seeing happening locally. And if people are confident in Nevis, it must mean they're confident in the government. We're doing the right things. I'm hearing from the good member opposite that we are saying that we're paying 5% salary increase on the 1st of January 2024, and that is nothing to talk about. And I sat back and I marveled, because I say, where else in the region are people getting this kind of salary increase? The good member said, the people should have get it already. But I'm saying, on what basis is she saying that? I am not sure who directs the operations in the opposition. But Nevis has a government and we run Nevis. And where our public servants are concerned, we are the ones who employ them, and we must be the ones to determine what we can seek to do. So somebody in St. Kitts, for their own reason, jump up and say they're giving 10% salary increase retroactive, and then the opposition in Nevis, as usual, marching orders from across the narrows, start to jump up. 10%, 10%. That's not the way things work. We are a government that manages the affairs of Nevis in a fiscally prudent way. So when we sat with our financial people, we said, what can we do? They said the best approach is an incremental approach. And instead of doing 10, we will do 15, but we'll spread it over the course of the 2 years. And that's what we did. We did 5 retroactive. Was this in 2022? Another 5 on the 1st of January 2023. And we will give, through the grace of God, the final 5 on the 1st of January 2024. Proper fiscal management of the affairs of the island, but ultimately benefiting our public servants. And you know, when the budget presentation was being prepared, I did not even remember, and I'm thankful to the member, Senator and Minister of Education, that this is the second pay increase this government is giving. Because in 2013, we gave a 10% salary increase spread over 3 years, 3, 3, and 4. And we have now come back to give a 15%, 5, 5, and 5. And remember, as the old people say, this is put pan put. So when public servants got the 10%, when now they get this 15, it is on top of the 10%. So if you're making $1,000 and the 10% took you to $1,100, this 15% now is, well, 5 and then 5 and then 5. So in reality, the impact of this is close to 30%. And that is why, going back to the budget, let me see if I can find it. It is important to note that in the budget address, Madam President, we spoke to a very significant factor at paragraph 43. There continues to be significant growth in average gross wages earned by the employees on Nevis. The average gross wages earned moved from 13.25 million at the end of 2020, that's per month, to 21.66 million as of July 31st, 2023. This indicates a growth rate in wages on the island of Nevis of 63% since 2020. When you compare it to just last year, average gross wages stood at $18.9 million per month. And for the first 7 months of 2023, it is already $21.66 million per month. It means that every single month on the island of Nevis, people are earning wages of $21.66 million. That's what's circulated. We are 14.6% over the pace of 2020, and the extra 5% not reached yet. That's going to come in January. So what it says is that our efforts in government, in rewarding our public servants and making sure that they have a paycheck that reflects our own efforts at increases over the years. 25% pay increase since 2013, the past decade, which, as I said, the way it's calculated is probably closer to 30% in terms of its impact. And I make the point because I think it's worth making, that when we sit as a cabinet, we are not concerned about self, because the members in this cabinet determined that we will not get the increase. Sometimes I think that point is lost.
That's true.
We did not get an increase. It's not as if we sat down and we say, oh, I'm the Premier, and the member for number 3 is the Deputy Premier, and oh, let us see how we could feather our own nest. That is not the CCM way. We gave a 15% increase to public servants while taking nothing for ourselves. That demonstrates, Madam President, a government that is putting people first.
Yes.
A government that is people-centric, a government that recognizes that our people matter most. That's what we keep talking about. Let me move to the broiler processing facility. The good member for number 4 pointed to the fact that on the cover of the budget address is a... And I don't know if she was trying to suggest that we were misleading people, because we see depictions all the time of what is to come, what is anticipated. But it is interesting because we said that we have commenced. That word is important, you know. commenced work on the broiler processing facility. We didn't say we had completed the work. And certainly work has been commenced. We have identified land. We have done plans. We have bought equipment. We have done training. We are ready to roll. We have engaged with people who are interested in investing in the sector, start small business operators. We are securing land, well advanced in relation to that. So absolutely we have commenced preparation. The good member opposite said to us that we must have a plan. But now we have a plan, she don't understand the plan. Because we are saying that we have commenced, we didn't say we've completed. Similarly, I'm happy the member for number 3 clarified the position, because last budget we said we are going to do 27 homes. In the budget address this year, we said we have completed 9. And we have 16 under construction. So if you have 9 completed and 16 under construction, how much is that? 25. And we said we will do 27. But what is wrong with that record? A home is something that will take an average of 3 months, perhaps, to complete. Well, I'm here in 6 months. Well, all right. So the reality is that we are on track. It's not as if you're coming in here and trying to mislead the public, Madam President. We said we're going to do 27 homes. That is the estimate. We understand people take time to get their loan at the bank. We understand that there's a process. There's nothing to see there. And so I move on. The good member opposite spoke about projects that we proposed in the last budget which have not yet materialized. And again, I think it betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of the budgetary process. Capital projects depend, Madam President, on the government's ability to raise the funding to execute. You may well see in your time in this honorable house, Madam President, some projects that come year after year. Some because they take time, meaning that the life of the execution of that project may be 2 or 3 years. Others because we might propose a project in this budget, anticipating that we can raise the revenue to do it, and then that does not materialize. The COVID period was a good example. When we stood in this house in 2019, reading the budget for 2020, all of us were excited. We were on top of the world. Why? Because the projections were excellent for the island of Nevis. And then by March of 2020, it all fell apart. It all fell apart. And I'm going to show, when we start to look at the question of debt, that it is that period of COVID when we can see a marked change in our debt profile here on the island of Nevis. Because we had no choice. And when people go around and try to tell public servants that this government is somehow hostile to them, I remind our public servants that at the height of the COVID pandemic, this cabinet took a decision. Some took a cut in their pay, and I took no pay for 22 months. But beyond that, this cabinet took a decision that they will and must ensure that our public servants were paid on time and in full every single penny, lockdown or no lockdown. You know why? We understood, for example, that a wife working as a teacher may have a husband who's a taxi driver, may have a husband who works in stewarding at Four Seasons or at Montpellier. But because the hotels are closed, the borders are closed, one income has been removed, and we said, what would happen if the government could not pay our workers? It means that some households would have no income at all. And yes, we borrowed. And if I had to do it tomorrow again, I would borrow to make sure that the people of Nevis Madam President, were able to survive.
That's right.
I am not going to apologize for it because we were facing a crisis. And that was the response of a government that cared about people and that put our people first. Every single public worker. We never laid off one person.
Never.
We never used COVID as a pretext to say, let us get rid of Tom and let us get rid of Harry. We never laid off one person. We paid every single NE worker, every single established worker on time and in full during COVID. They sometimes ask where the money gone. That's where the money went. Because if you have salaries to pay $10 million a month and nothing coming in, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Sometimes when I hear the debate in the country, I wonder if we're all deaf. If you're all blind. If you can't see and understand. We had some hard decisions to make in this government and in this cabinet. And I'm pleased that this team, we now have an added member to the team. But the core team is still here. We have lost one member of the team, but he's going to come back soon. The core team. And we sat down and our abiding concern was the people of Nevis. And our public servants. And understanding that many households went from 2 and 3 income to 1. And we could not take that one away. That's what we have to deal with. So the process of budgeting is speaking to your plans, your programs. And it is sometimes not too different to our personal budget. Every January morning, some people say, oh, this year is the year I'm going to buy a car. But then guess what happened? Something happened. Your cousin gets sick. You meet an accident on the job. You get laid off from your job. Something happens. And you say, you know what, I have to defer that until I'm in a better position to do it. That's what the budgetary process is. There's no guarantee that because we say we will have the Simeon Daniel Community College, that it means it must happen in that budgetary cycle, because sometimes if the resources aren't there to do it, you defer it. But our commitment remains, Madam President. And perhaps an understanding of the process would assist in all of us, government and opposition, having a better grasp of what it is we're doing when we're here in this house. The good member mentioned derelict vehicles. And it's a good point that she made. It is true that we need to do more. We had an arrangement in place already, Madam President. And that arrangement, regrettably, the gentleman called Folsom, I think his name was, that at a different time, the government in Sinkis looked across, saw what was happening, and decided that they wanted Mr. Folsom in Sinkis. Well, just like MSR Media and others, they went. What I can say is that through the good graces of Mr. Andrew Hendrickson, my good friend Murray, we have re-engaged with Mr. Folsom. And we will be having some close conversations in the new year to see if we can resume. And all that was, Madam President, I'm not sure if you are aware of the plan that we had that was working, is that they would go around and pick up derelict vehicles, crush them. In fact, it was quite fascinating to see that a whole bus came down to a cube of metal. And then they would pack them into containers and export them. So I'd want to say to the member opposite that this was something that was already in place. It came to a halt, but we intend to restart it now that we're looking into the new year. So have no fear. This is something that we had thought about and that we will proceed to deal with in the new year. As I sat there and I listened to the member for number 4, and I said, I won't respond to everything she said. But the member mentioned fair share, and I had to take my ear and shake it and clear it. Because I said fair share. We just had not one but two campaigns in Nevis last year. And only one party was making any noise about any share. In fact, if I understood the narrative coming from the opposition properly, they were saying we shouldn't be getting anything at all. Nevis, you should run your own affairs on your own. And Sinkis must keep all of our citizenship money over there. Well, why? Tell me how that could make sense. That was the argument to the electorate. That we needed to be more independent. And I don't even know why the question of independence has been raised. Because if my brother and I own a cow, then my brother and I own the milk. And if we sell the milk, my brother and I should share the money. It has nothing to do with independence. But that was the opposition message to the public. Nevis shouldn't get none of the money. So I don't understand today. The good member opposite, or was it yesterday? Yesterday. He's talking about fair share. And we're not hearing anything about fair share. Well, I wonder what she wants to hear. Continue with the position that Nevis shouldn't get anything. Let us over here worry about engaging with the federal government. And that is why I think the people of Nevis gave us the mandate so that we can continue to engage. They said the same amount is reflected in the budget as coming from the federal government. I think it's identified in the budget as a share of CBI receipts. But that is only speaking to the amount that comes to the NIA. I want to be very clear and deliberate in my statements, Madam President. We have an amount that comes to the NIA by way of transfer. I think it is $5.5 million each month. But last year, in 2022, the Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Terence Drew, decided that he would introduce something called a CBI dividend. And that was paid through Social Security, not to the NIA, but to those, including the people of Nevis, who were registered with Social Security and who qualified. Sinkis got it and Nevis got it.
That's right.
You see, some people don't seem to understand when we talk about fair share, what we mean, We're talking about equal opportunity across the board for divisions and petitions. Our fair share of whatever is sharing.
Right.
Because when bad come, we're going to get our share of the bad. So when good come, when our cow has milk and the milk is sold, we must get our share. But some seem to feel that you only get a share if it comes to the NIA. And I'm saying no. We are getting a share coming to the NIA. And we continue our discussions with the federal government to work out a fixed formula for that. But I'm saying just in the past year, we had the CBI dividend paid. Nevisians benefited from that. We then had a double salary paid. I believe it was in November. November, I recall last year. And I remember speaking to the Honorable Prime Minister. I said, well, if you're paying double salary, public servants in Nevis should get too. And they got their double salary in November last year. Then I believe this year rolled around, there was another dividend, CBI dividend. People benefited from that. Then they had some back to school vouchers. Minister, am I correct?
Yes.
Back to school vouchers. Again, I asked the Minister of Education, call your counterpart. CBI money paying for back to school voucher. Nevis have school children too. And Nevis benefited from the back to school voucher. Then the Prime Minister for Independence 40
Reset.
say he doing a reset and Tut Mun Sam and Bagay gonna get $1,000. I said, Pierre, remember over here, people of Nevis, and the people of Nevis got theirs. So when we talk about what has happened to fair share, people should know me by now as a politician, as somebody who isn't afraid to stand up for the people of Nevis. But when I look, and I regret, Madam President, because I asked for the numbers because I wanted to come with some figures as to what the reset and what the dividend and all that translated into for the people of Nevis. But I was told by the Social Security officer in Nevis that they're not able to disaggregate the number. And we were not able to get a total number from the financial people on Syncits in time for this budget, because we would have used the total number and extrapolated from that what we thought came to the island of Nevis. But I raised those because these are direct benefits, not coming to the NIA, but coming to the people of Nevis from the Citizenship by Investment Program. This has nothing to do with the PAP that is ongoing, with the STEP that is ongoing, with the peace program that is ongoing, all of which benefit the island of Nevis as well. So I'm saying in the round, we are in a position where I feel that more has been flowing to the people of Nevis than hitherto flowed. And I want to make that very clear. Madam President, I wasn't going to raise it, but since I'm here, I just would like to say, through you, to my honorable friend opposite, that this constant moaning about not getting the documents in time really needs to stop. This house has had rules long before I came here, long before you came here, Madam President, long before any of us came here. And those rules have been set for a very long time. In fact, in the old days when I started out, back in 2006, we only got the budget address after it had been delivered, you know. When the Minister of Finance, then the Honorable Joseph Parry, finished reading, we had to line up over there, and the people in finance had a box, and they would give you, and you had to run now to go through to see. Yeah. Now, the estimates are handed out, and I can see, because I recall looking at the honorable member opposite while I was reading, and she was making notes in the margins. And that's an easy way sometimes to respond. You make a note, then you go through. But the reality is, if you know the rules, you can't decide you want to become a cricketer and then say they're bowling too fast. Why is the spin bowler allowed to bowl googly? Every pursuit in life has rules. And if you're going to enter the arena, you equip yourself to do so. And I confess I was alarmed because the honorable member opposite has, what's the word I want to use? I want to say pack, but that might be unparliamentary. Has a group of people around her. Nobody could talk, Mota Masi. They have an opinion on everything. So I would have thought that the honorable member would call out to her group and say, hey, come, budget time. Let's sit down, and instead of pontificating on radio, let's just put something together to present to the people of Nevis. And I looked across at my member for number 4 and member opposite. And it was a forlorn figure because not a soul was in the gallery. None of the Multimasti on radio every day and night came to support. And so I tried not to scowl, so when she looked at me, she saw a pleasant face. Because I said she must feel so alone that nobody came. Not one member of the executive, member of the party came to support the honorable member. And not one contributed, because if they had done so, I don't believe it, I hear the constant refrain. The good member must have said it about 5 times. Lord, I didn't have enough time, you know. The time is too short. If I had more time, you know, I could have done this, you know. But those are the rules. If you're going to play football, you must know what football calls for. If you're going to play cricket, you must know what cricket calls for. I am going to Syncits next week once I have strength. And Prime Minister Drew is going to present his budget, and I will respond the next day. That is the standard. In fact, you should be so in tune with what is happening on the island of Nevis and in the country that if you are asked to respond right away, you should be able to respond because you know what issues are. This is not rocket science. So if you're not prepared for this thing called politics and this thing called representative politics, then get yourself prepared. If you don't know, it's okay. All of us were at a point when we didn't know. But try your best to find out. Don't come in here and complain about what has always been the case. That doesn't make any sense. Now, I want to segue to a point. Because the good member opposite, I keep saying that the good member opposite is new to the House and new to the politics. But that is not an excuse for being uninformed or ill-informed. She used some hyperboles throughout her presentation, some expressions that clearly had no basis in fact. And eventually, when I challenged one of the statements, she said what she ought to have said, I retract. But one of the things she said, and I made a note, she said the debt is now what it is. It was referenced $544.69 million. And the reference I made is this. 9 out of 10 people in Nevis say that they can see where this amount of debt has gone. 9 out of 10. I know, and I'm prepared to say not one soul spoke to the member opposite about any debt. That's what I'm prepared to wager. But if I were the member opposite, leading a party that has a record in government, there are certain topics I would not touch. And debt is one of the topics that I would not touch. But you see, it comes back. Do you know what you're getting yourself into? So it's an easy thing, you know, the government has records. So I asked, well, what was the situation in the NRP years from 2006 to 2013 in relation to debt? So, Madam President, let me read into the record. That in 2006, the Nevis Island had an overall debt. And let me explain. When I say overall debt, we have a debt for the central government, that's the NIA, and then we have a debt for NEVLEC and NASPA and NHLDC and those are the statutory corporations. So we combine those two numbers to get the overall debt. So I'm only dealing at this point with the overall debt. In 2006, when the NRP took office in Nevis, they had an overall debt, the island had an overall debt of $230.8 million. 230.8. In 2007, that went to 240.6. In 2008, that went to 280.1. In 2009, that went to 319.45. In 2010, it went to 350.71. In 2011, it went to 430.36. And then in 2012, it dropped to $402,640,000. And I asked the question of the financial people, well, how was the NRP able, having shown an increase every single year, to shave off $28,000, $28 million, forgive me, from the overall debt? And I smiled when the response came. You know what the response was? The land for debt. So, the IMF arrangement. When the IMF arrangement came, people were forced to take a haircut. Local creditors and overseas. And they had the land for debt situation. And that is what reduced the debt. So it wasn't in fact any management, so to speak, or any reduction in spending. It was the fact that through the IMF program, the debt went down some $28 million. By 2013, when we got back into office, that debt was at $389.71 million. If we look at the period that the NRP was in office, it shows that we added a total of $158.91 million in new debt. And that is excluding the land for debt and the IMF arrangements and the haircut to people. 158.91 million of new debt in 6 years. Put differently, the NRP administration was accumulating debt at a rate of $26.5 million per year. Now, I believe that that is important, because if we were to exclude the IMF intervention, that number would jump appreciably. So even with IMF intervention, even with land for debt, even with haircuts to people, even the church did haircut, we still had new debt of $158.91 million in 6 years. You want to talk about debt? Let us talk about debt. There was no COVID during that period. There was no global pandemic during that period. We had a financial crisis in 2008. That is certain. But during this period under review, the world never shut down for 2 years. COVID shut down the world for 2 years under this government. Let us now look at the CCM record. We got back into office in 2013. We met a debt when we got in. Well, by the end of 2013, I'm going to discount 2013 and go to 2014. $363.69 million. That's what the debt was in 2014. By 2023, October, that debt is $544.69 million. In that 10-year period, we have added $181 million in new debt at a rate of $18.1 million per year. For purposes of comparison, for those who like to do the clips, the NRP in 6 years added debt of $158.91 million at a rate of $26.5 million a year. The CCM added $181 million in new debt in 10 years at a rate of $18.1 million per year. And when we look at the numbers, Madam President, and I'd be delighted to provide the House with the numbers, we realize that the COVID years did considerable damage to our debt position. Because of that $181 million, we added $62.5 million just in the period 2020-2021. That's when, going back to what I said, we took a decision that we had to pay our public servants. We had to do what we needed to do at the hospital. We had to buy ventilators. We had to do construction work over at the airport. All the testing, COVID testing. Some of these labs and the lab owners became multi-millionaires out of COVID testing. Yeah. We had to do it. And the numbers bear that out, because the numbers jumped in 2020 and 2021. The numbers are there. There's nothing for us to resile from. But a point was made by the Minister with responsibility for infrastructure. Good member for number one. And he was talking about budget deficits and what deficits can sometimes be used for. And you know what the good thing is? The Island Main Road is now done. It doesn't need to be done again, we hope, for another 20 years. The Brownhill Road is now done. The Bath Road is now done. The Butler's Road, the Hanley's Road, the Brazier's Road, the Shaw's Road, the Bypass Road. We are hopeful they do not need to be done for another 20, 25 years. It means, therefore, that we would have done some capital expenditure now that we are hopeful we do not have to repeat for the next 2 decades. And so the investment now, we are hopeful, will pay dividends down the road. Going back to the same investors. When people come, they want to know, what is your water infrastructure like? What is your road infrastructure like? What is your electricity infrastructure like? Is the island an island that is developed enough? What is your internet connectivity? What is your crime? All of these are the questions they're going to ask you. And so we would have invested, Madam President, in the future sustainability, since a lot of people like that word, of this island. And the figures are there. What I will say to the public is that I don't like debt. And as much as we have had to run up debt, I don't like it. And I've said to my colleagues, I said, listen, we had to take some difficult measures in this budget because we need to reduce the debt. I've said so. And my colleagues have agreed. So I am not here trying to paint some panacea or say that the debt position should continue to increase. No. I'm saying that we need to reduce the debt. But I'm making the explanation as to why we are where we are, and making the comparison to say that it doesn't lie in the mouth of the member opposite to tell this government anything about debt. Not the party that she leads. Reckless when they were in government, insofar as the public purse is concerned. Now, I'm going to go to something I don't mean to be controversial, and I promise not to be, Madam President. But my colleague spoke to a point, and I think I want to spend a few minutes on the point. And the point is, you see this document? Audit report. When I too heard the member opposite talking about audit report, and saying the audit report says this and the audit report says that, I said, praise be to God, that we finally have a government that understands the constitutional necessity of having an audit report in this House. You see this document here, Madam President? This is an audit report laid by my predecessor, the late Premier, Honorable Vance Amory. It's dated November 9th, 2015. The date is important. And it says on its face, report of the Director of Audit on the accounts of the Nevis Island Administration for the years ended December 31st, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. Let me open it. Let me open it. This was presented signed by one Wesley Galloway, Director of Audit, and dated November 9th, 2015. Now, it says this, reporting mandate. The audit report on the accounts of the Nevis Island Administration is submitted to the Minister of Finance to be laid before the Nevis Island Assembly as required. Those words are important. As required by Section 76(4) and 108(2) of the St. Christopher Nevis Constitution, 1983, and Section 8 of the Audit Act, number 8 of 1990. The legislation requires the Director of Audit to submit his report within a period of 9 months after the close of each financial year. The report is in respect of audit work on the accounts of the administration covering the 5-year period, 2007 to 2011. What that means in simple, ordinary language, when the NRP was in government, they never produced any audited reports. When the constitution of the land, the highest law of the land, Madam President, based on the training I know you have, you know the constitution is the highest law of the land. So one must now really raise the question, was the government of Nevis between 2006 and 2013 operating in a constitutional way in relation to the finances of this island? And the answer must be no. No. Because year after year, so when I hear they talk about openness, transparency, good governance, and I said to myself, not one soul had any understanding of what the expenditure of the NRP government was like. Because the auditor, independent office of the auditor is who provides the check and balance. There was no check, no balance. The Constitution was breached each and every single year. I don't even know why we didn't take them to court. I can't remember now. They come in here and pontificating about the audit report says this, the audit report says that. When for 6 years, not once did they bring an audit report to this house as required by law. And not just by any law, by the Constitution of St. Kitts and Nevis. Not once. So, during that period, Nevis was flying blind. Nobody had any idea what the finances of the island were like. Because there was no report to this honorable house. I look at this report, tabled in 2005, covering all those years of bad government. Hear what it says at paragraph 3.1. The accounts of the Nevis Island Administration for the year ended December 31st, 2006. Remember there was something that happened in 2006? Government change. CCM lost the government in 2006, NRP took over. Here's what the audit report says. The accounts of the Nevis Island Administration for the year ended December 31st, 2006, along with the audit report thereon, were forwarded to the Honorable Premier on April 28, 2008. Those accounts and the audit report were tabled in the Assembly on December 9th, 2008. So the only report that the NRP ever tabled in this house from the auditor was the report from 2006. Since then, they've not passed back. Only report. So, wait, I want to say this too. The audit office is also aware that accounts for the years 2012 and 2013 are complete and ready for submission to the audit office, but they're waiting on documents and anticipate those for 2014 and 2015. Now, Madam President, I'm not going to go into, because that is now history, what the data showed. But the data showed same thing, runaway debt, runaway deficits. That was the position. I use this only to show that there was constitutional impropriety in this house and on this island from the period 2006 until 2013. Constitutional impropriety. And I would go further, because if it contravenes the Constitution, it is illegality, not just impropriety. No audit report. I am pleased, Madam President, and I can raise my hand in this honorable house and say that this CCM government has ensured that the audit report is presented on time and each year. And we not only have updated the accounts to bring us up to speed, we have now ensured that each year, and that is why I was so pleased at the start of this budget debate to lay on the table of the Honorable House the audit report for 2022. That is what good government is about. That is what good governments do, Madam President. And what I find about the audit report, since I now have it in my hand, I now refer to our audit report, 2022. Well, that one was ours too, but the one for 2022. What I find is interesting is how the good member opposite tried to cherry pick. Tried to cherry pick. Now, my point is this. Do not use the audit report to paint a particular picture that is inaccurate when the report is viewed as a whole. And so I went through the report. I decided to read it in full over the luncheon period. Having looked at it prior, but I read it and this time made some notes. At page 7, Madam President, overview of public accounts, performance summary. Madam President, there's a copy on the table if you didn't have a copy. Page 7. The public accounts, and I quote, I read, the public accounts for the year ended December 31st, 2022, disclose an overall surplus of $6.29 million. This is a significant improvement from the $17.71 million deficit result in 2021. It can be noted that in the recent times, the Nevis Island administration has made an overall surplus in 2020 of $11.63 million and 2015, $4.08 million. But that's good news. Because the independent auditor is telling us that for the period ended December 31st, 2022, the last accounting period, that the account showed an overall surplus of $6.29 million. When you consider that the year before we had a deficit of $17.71 million, you mean that's a lot of making up? You have to take off that 17.71, you know, before you get into positive territory. So the turnaround is more like $24 million. And as my good friend here from number 1 is whispering to me, the year before, 2020, was a COVID year. COVID year. So what the overview is saying is that we have turned things around in terms of our fiscal position. When we go to the middle of the next paragraph, it said at the end of the fiscal year, the statement of revenue and expenditure shows actual revenue collection total $234.33 million, comprising recurrent revenue of $136,517,998 and capital revenue of $97,811,557. The actual expenditure totaled $228.04 million, comprising recurrent expenditure of $177,342,710 million and the capital expenditure of $50,692,736, which resulted in the surplus mentioned of $6.29 million. I like the sound of that. We go over to page 11. And there's a nice looking graph. What do they call it? Pie chart? No, this is not a pie chart. This is what do you call it? This is a graph? Yes. It's not a graph, it's a bar graph. Bar graph. They're testing all my first one. Bar graph. So there's a bar graph here. And what the bar graph is showing is that in 2020, COVID year, but we were able to manage a surplus of $11.63 million. 2021, we fell back badly to a deficit of 17.71, but we have recovered in 2022 to a surplus of $6.29 million. And so the fortunes have ebbed and flowed, but we are currently in better territory. At the bottom of paragraph, page 11, the historical data shows several years of deficits and only 3 years of surplus results. The surpluses are shown in 2015 of $4.08 million, $11.63 million in 2020, $6.29 million in 2022. The remaining 7-year period in the chart accumulated a total grand deficit of $105.86 million, with the highest being in 2019 of $26.78 million. Good and bad, but let us tell our people the full story. Not some of the story, the full story. Let me go over. This is the current audit report. I go to page 24. This is what the auditor says. During the 2022 financial year, all program heads kept their spending on the current account well within the budgeted amounts provided. Let me say that again, because I think that is commendable. During the 2022 financial year, all program heads kept their spending on the current account well within the budgeted amounts provided. The following table shows some of the savings on the budget allocation for ministries with budgeted figures over 5 million for 2022. The first ministry, remember the good member opposite, jump on the Premier's office and say how we had overspending. But you see, the Premier's office is responsible for a lot of different departments, a lot of different heads, passport, police, Governor General, a lot of different things fall to us, magistrate. So, you can't cherry pick aspects of the Premier's office and say, oh, you overspent here, without again giving the full picture. Now, here's what the Director of Audit is saying. That these ministries, the Premier's ministry, had a budget of $5.6 million. We only spent $5.4 in 2022. We had a savings of $166,727. The Ministry of Works had a budget of $15.4 million. They only spent $14.015, a saving of $1.4 million. Ministry of Agriculture had a budget of $7.1 million. They spent $6.5, a saving of $626,000. The Ministry of Health had a budget of $22.8 million. They spent $20.5 million for a saving of $2.2 million. And the Ministry of Education and Library Services had a budget of $28 million, and they spent $26 for a saving of $1.6 million. I believe all the members here should take a vote.
Yes.
Because it means that they had the ministries and the spending under control.
Prudent.
That's what the audit report shows. I have dealt with the office of the Premier. I don't need to belabor that. But I thought I would make that point. Now I want to go quickly because the honorable member for number 4 said, and she read, that the audit report, this was the part she read, she chose to read. The audit report identifies a weakness in the ordering process, where the quantities of items requested are not specified in the orders. This deficiency poses a potential risk for fraudulent activities. The Ministry of Finance should prioritize raising awareness among both new and existing staff members about the significance of accountability for government funds in the accounting system. She read that out. You all remember?
Yes.
Read that out. But what she didn't bother to tell the House or the public is that that was the second paragraph of a conclusion that had a first paragraph. You see, when I say when you set out to mislead, that was an observation. I'm not resilient from that. But here's what the auditor, Director of Audit, said. From the detailed statements of expenditure for 2022, it can be concluded that significant effort was made to control expenditure for the year. From the detailed statements of expenditure for 2022, it can be concluded that significant effort was made to control expenditure for the year. The fact that only 2 of the expenditure heads on the recurrent account exceeded its budgeted allocation is commendable. Hence, the resulting net savings on the budget in the amount of 3.54 million. Then they went on to say, we must focus on a few things. Yep. But the overarching conclusion is a commendation to the government from the Director of Audit. But somehow the member for number 4 missed that. Missed that. So he didn't have enough time? Oh. Missed that and jumped only to an observation that was made, but missed the fact that the result was a commendation, Madam President. And I feel that that is important. I want to just take a brief moment because the member opposite made a statement which I thought was curious. And she made this statement with such aplomb, such vim, vigor, and vitality that she surprised me as well. And she prefaced her statement by saying, to you, Madam President, that you may not know. Now, we have said in the budget address that we have a problem at the supply office. The problem we have at the supply office is that the cost of the goods sold there have kept climbing. And the cost of shipping globally has kept climbing. The result of that is that the cost to us of the products sold there has gone higher and higher with each shipment, but we have not increased the price. Now, Madam President, we indicated, because that is how we do things as a government, that we will have to look at the pricing at the supply office. And we said so in the budget. The Honourable Member for number 4 came and said, to you, Madam President, you may not know, but poor people shop at the supply office for their food. She said, like the Prime Minister said, when you can't afford the brand name cornflakes, they go to supply office. Well, I get so frightened, I jump on my phone right away and I message the PS. I said, PS, since when we start sell cornflakes and food at the supply office? PS said no, because sometimes things happen and we might not know. So I wanted to be sure. So I just want to say, Madam President, I'm not surprised that you wouldn't know. Because it appears the member for number 4 doesn't know what happens at the supply office. The supply office sells dog food, animal feed, toilet paper, flour to the bakeries, rice wholesale, and it also sells molasses to the farmers. I don't know who poor person going down supply office to shop for grocery. I don't know. So I'm not surprised that you don't know, because we don't know either. But the point that was being made with such vim, vigor, and vitality is that, oh, where are the poor people going to shop for the groceries if you all increase the price down at supply office? When supply office doesn't cater for that. So I just think, to the extent that the public might have been misled, the supply office sells flour wholesale to our bakers, we sell rice wholesale, we sell toilet paper, we sell animal feed, we sell dog food, and we sell molasses. The molasses is really for the farmers.
Yes.
But we will engage elsewhere on who buying the most molasses and what they're doing with it. You said they buy molasses daily? Who buying the most and what they're doing with it? But the point I'm making is that it demonstrates the extent to which the good member is out of touch. Out of touch in terms of what is going on Nevis. So, when I heard the member for number 3 say that there's this constant refrain from the member opposite and others that there's nothing happening, it may well be it is because they're not aware of what is happening. Because to be so bold as to say to the Honorable President, you may not know, but this is what is happening at the supply office. When nothing tall goes so, supply office has nothing to do with people and their shopping. So it really begs the question as to how informed our people are. Now, I want to just quickly look at some land acquisition, because we mentioned that we were acquiring lands by purchase for various public purposes. And the member raised opposite that we did not perhaps specify. So I just want to point out to the House and to the public that we are in negotiations to purchase some lands at Webb's Estate. We are in negotiations to purchase some land at Garner's Estate. And we are in negotiations to purchase some lands at Bath Estate. Those are the 3 parcels that I'm aware of at this point. And of course, if we are to acquire any lands, will certainly be advising and informing the House and the people of Nevis. But those lands have been acquired, Webster State, for purposes of our poultry industry, Ghana's for purposes of housing stock, and the fact that the NHLDC finds itself now not having sufficient land to execute its mandate, and Bath Estate because we're looking to create a home for NTV and to create a proper first-class television studio for NTV. So that is where we are at this point, Madam President, and so I wanted to make that clear, that it was not an effort to hide anything. We just did not specify in the budget debate. Now, Madam President, I wanted to say a word because the honorable member, she's now left, but the honorable member seemed throughout to have had a fixation on the fact that the Honorable Alexis Jeffers has been engaged by this government to function, to bring the various stakeholders together for the airport project. And she kept coming back time and time again. She asked about NASPA. What is NASPA's role? We had one public consultation so far, and I'll be the first to say it did not go as well as we would have liked. We had a lot of technical issues. But it was not intended to be a selling of the project. It was intended to be information for the public. And the question was asked then of Mr. Jeffers, who chaired the meeting, the Honorable Alexis Jeffers, what is your role? And he explained what his role was. He has been hired by the administration to bring the stakeholders together. The question was asked of him, where's NASPA? And he explained, NASPA has been consulted every step of the way. In fact, we're going to put together a committee comprising NASPA, Customs, Immigration, Fire, in order to execute the project when we get to that stage. All that was explained publicly at the town hall meeting we had on Monday, if I recall. The good member for number 4 was there. She was the one asking some of the questions. So she had the answers from there. And I just wondered sometimes again, why we go down certain roads. Because it seems to me that the opposition and the member herself, because I've heard various public utterances, that they seem to have a problem that the Honorable Alexis Jeffers was given an assignment by this government. But Madam President, I'm not going to apologize for hiring the Honorable Alexis Jeffers because I know his competence. I have worked with him in government, I've worked with him outside government, and I know what he's capable of delivering. We heard the good member for number 3 talking about Indian Castle Fruit Orchard, talking about the strides in agriculture, the preparatory steps for the poultry industry, all of this ground, and I was so happy when he gave kudos to the Honorable Alexis Jeffers for what he had done, the foundation he had built. So if I have competent people available, but by the process of democracy, Mr. Jeffers falls short by 8 votes, and therefore is no longer in this honorable house. I am supposed to just discard somebody who has something to offer in terms of the talents that he brings. I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to apologize for not doing it. And I believe that the NRP should leave these matters alone. The member opposite. You know why I say that, Madam President? Everybody in this house is old enough to know that on the 3rd of July 2014, it was a Thursday, a gentleman called Hensley Daniel, then Deputy Premier of Nevis, was declared null and void by a court of law. The election that he purported to have won was declared null and void by a court of law. That was Thursday, the 3rd of July 2014. Friday morning, the 4th of July, Hensley Daniel was back at work. 2014. No, it wasn't 2014, 2012. Forgive me. 2012. July 3rd, 2012. The following day, the man declared the day before by the court to have benefited from all his fraudulent activity at the polls was back at work in the Nevis Island administration. I don't remember what they call him, advisor. I don't know the terminology. But I know he did not miss 1 hour of work. Alexis Jeffers was not declared null and void by any court. He contested an election, he fell short. But if the government feels that he has value and there's something that he can bring to the table and that he can pull this project together as he has been doing, then I don't understand the constant attacks. This thing isn't as simple as it sounds, you know, Madam President, because I find myself now embroiled in a lawsuit. Every week they sue me. Every week they sue me. I don't know why. But I'm embroiled currently in a lawsuit. I know I can't get into the details of it. But what I will say is that the fact that Mr. Jeffers has been employed by this government has found its way into the lawsuit. That is how rabid this opposition is behaving. But Hensley, who was declared null and void, came back the next day. And that was fine. I think that we need to sometimes take a step back and not use personal problems with people as a basis for shaping political views on a matter. We're not going to all like each other. That's human nature. Some people don't like their family. So we're not going to all like each other. But when we come in here and we enter public life, we must be able to put those matters aside and function, Madam President, for the best interest of the people that we serve. That's what we must seek to do. One of the big issues they're raising on the airport project, they vex that Zook get a job, but they're now raising this issue, saying that there was no tendering for the consultants. The consultants have been working around this project for some time, because I know that as far back as 2015, we had preliminary discussions with them. They did some preliminary work. On the basis of the preliminary work that they did, we decided to engage them on the basis of their track record. They had finished Argyle International Airport in St. Vincent. We decided they have done some 11 airports around the world. We decided, all right, we have confidence that they can deliver a project for the people of Nevis. Our job was to select someone who was competent and in whom we had confidence. And that's what we've done. Now, some may argue you should have gone to tender, you should have had bids, you should have done this, you should have done that. And whilst I respect those arguments, Madam President, it is within the capacity of any government, and certainly within our capacity as a cabinet, to select a competent contractor in whom we have confidence to advise as consultant on this project. And that is what we have done. We have looked again, because sometimes when the NRP speaks, they forget they were in government. So I ask the question rhetorically and say, the NRP in government built 3 community centers: Jessops, Barnesgut, Cotton Grove. They built the road to Paradise, to Barnesgut, and parts of Jessops. They built out a portion of the Island Main Road. They built the NEPAC building. They built roads in Nugent Heights and Pinnies. They had a company that they gave the quarry to that was operating in, what's up there? You call that Gingerland? The quarry? New River. They gave the geothermal project to a company called West Indies Power. Any of you ever hear that any of these projects went out for tender?
No.
That there was any process of tendering in relation to them? In fact, one company got nearly all of these projects. So I am not going to get too caught up with those who are now trying to pontificate and play holier than thou in relation to how government is managed, because they have a track record of when they were there and what they did during that time. None of these projects, as far as I'm aware, went out to any tender. But the projects were done. And as I mentioned, geothermal, I want, Madam President, to just remind us all that the geothermal project in Nevis started in 2004. It was something called a Geo-Carib project, which was funded by the OS, the Organization of American States. We had a change of government in Nevis in 2006. The NRP took over. And I remember it was one junior minister called Powell who became Mr. Geothermal. I'm sure you all remember. And without any tender, any bidding, any consultation of any kind, we heard that they had abandoned the Geo-Carib project and they were now in bed with a company called West Indies Power. West Indies Power came. I'm sure you all remember the name Kerry MacDonald. And there was naturally an issue as to who was involved with West Indies Power. I'm not going to get into all of that. But we know that these transactions were not arm's length. Now, Madam President, the NRP engaged West Indies Power, no bidding, no tendering, nothing. Geothermal was handed to them. And then West Indies Power started, and I believe all of us recall, I'm sure the member for number 1 recall, because there was a huge party right there by D.R. Walwyn Square. Whole of town block off, pom-pom girls, balloons, and they said geothermal. They had a big christening party. It's the first time in the history of Nevis that a baby christened before it born was geothermal. Big party right there. Those of us remember that afternoon. Pickup truck, fresh tune, painted up, geothermal. All appeared to have been going well, but guess what happened, Madam President? The same NRP sued West Indies Power. You know why they sued West Indies Power? They sued West Indies Power to get out of the contract that they had made. And so when the government changed in 2013, Madam President, and the CCM-led administration went back into government, the very first thing that we had to do was fight a legal case in the court with West Indies Power. We fought the case at the High Court. West Indies Power appealed to the Court of Appeal, and we won the case, and we were so able to get rid of West Indies Power. We did not sue them. NRP sued them. Sometimes when they're telling the story about geothermal, they like to miss certain critical parts of it. We had to waste time with litigation, and then we got some consultants through the U.S. State Department, and we went through a bidding process, and we selected a company, NREI, Nevis Renewable Energy International, I think they were called. Turns out that they could not raise the money to do the project. And so we eventually exited the contract because we had exit clauses, performance clauses and exit clauses. So we exited the contract. And in looking around, we then sought to access funding from the CDB, Caribbean Development Bank. And I reported to the House already that last year, the CDB approved $17 million US. And we are now still seeking, Madam President, to get us over the line. That's where we are. And I'll come back and report in due course. But I just wanted to remind the House and the public of the history of geothermal energy. Because from 2006 until 2013, NRP was in bed with West Indies Power until they fall out. and had big litigation that we, when we got into government, the Brantley government, had to go in court to fight with West Indies Port. That is the legacy of geothermal in relation to them. Madam President, I wanted to make reference to the scandalous statement that somehow we were putting people's health at risk up at the hospital, but I don't need to, because the good minister dealt with it adequately. All I would like to say is that the health system in Nevis right now is the strongest that it has ever been. Because we have invested, Madam President, not only in equipment, diagnostic tools, new ambulances, but we have also invested in personnel. We didn't just buy CT scan and mammogram, and we call it PACS system. We also hired a radiologist. We have internists. We have obstetrics and gynecology. We have orthopedic surgeons. And as the minister said, for the first time that we are aware, we have 3 surgeons available to us at the Alexandra Hospital. And how I could forget this one, Madam President. As all of us on this side get older, might be something that we would need to look at. But we also have plastic surgery available. All of this that we now have, pediatricians available. We now have obstetrics and gynecology in the clinics. Never used to have that before. You don't have to come to town now if you're pregnant. You go to the clinic.
Indulgence number. Member, you may proceed.
Sorry?
You may proceed.
Oh, Madam President, I only need another 2 minutes because I am wrapping up. But I wanted to speak as we talk about the economy and the economic recovery. I wanted to speak for just a moment on the phenomenal performance of the Nevis Tourism Authority and the returns that they've had. And I want to say, Madam President, that we are certainly back to pre-pandemic levels in relation to our tourism, and I'm grateful for that. I want to commend the board at the NTA, the CEO, Mr. Devon Liebert, and his entire team. And I give some figures for purposes, Madam President, of the House and the public, that you will be aware that there's a tourism levy, a 2%, tourism and development levy it's called. And that 2% is added to hotel bills, restaurant bills. And that tourism levy for 2019, which was pre-COVID, yielded $2.3 million, 2%. That was the money. And that 2% goes directly to the Nevis Tourism Authority because it is the budget that they use to promote the island. In 2022, that 2% yielded $2.5 million. I'm rounding off the figures. So in 2019, pre-COVID, it was 2.3 million. In 2022, the first year post-COVID, it was 2.5 million, which represented a 5.8% growth. And in 2023, up to November, I just got the figures while I was here, we have so far collected $3.018 million, a growth, Madam President, since over last year of 19.8%. Of note, Madam President, is that twice so far this year, the NTA from that 2% has collected over $500,000 in a single month, January and April. We have never in the history of tourism in Nevis collected $500,000 in a single month before, and we did it twice. this year. That tax of 2% yielded, therefore, thus far for the year, $3,018,127. And it tells us, when we look at the sector, bearing in mind that that is 2% of hotel and restaurant, that the sector has had reported sales up to November of over $150 million. And I believe, Madam President, that is significant, and I wanted to read it into the record because when we have good people doing good work, we need to celebrate them. I should say that the NTA, like every other agency, was forced into debt because of COVID. Naturally, if they make their money from 2% on hotel and restaurants, and the hotel and restaurants were closed during COVID, they weren't making anything. So they went into debt. But they've roared back, and I'm hopeful, and I've said to them, I want them to do even better in 2024. So I commend them. Let me end by saying a word of farewell to Permanent Secretary Edson Elliott. Mr. Elliott would have served long in the public service. He was principal at the Charleston Secondary School and distinguished himself there. And then we invited him to be Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Human Resources. Mr. Elliott took the decision that he would go into retirement, and I want to use this rostrum to say thank you to him for his sterling service over the years and to wish him well in his retirement. Let me also join the Honorable Member, the Honorable Senator, and Minister of Education in thanking Permanent Secretary Kevin Barrett for his excellent performance as our Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education over these years. He too was elevated by this government to that position, and he performed well. We asked him, and he agreed to cross over to Human Resources to help us there now that P.S. Elliott has retired. And we wish him well in his new role and hope that he'll continue with the same zeal and enthusiasm with which he managed the Ministry of Education. And let me lastly, Madam President, congratulate Zanella Claxton, a young woman, a formidable young woman, who has been elevated to the position of Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education. She was hitherto our Principal Education Officer. And I want to commend her because I know her passion for education. I know the level of work and the work ethic that she brings, the expertise that she brings. And I believe that we are going to see great things from Ms. Claxton. And so I wanted to join the Minister of Education and record my congratulations to her and wish her well in this new role. And it would not be me if I didn't say that we are seeing in Nevis gender equality at work. We're not just talking about it. We're seeing it at work. And when we see the number of females, and not just females, but young females, who are being elevated into positions, decision makers for this government, it means, Madam President, that we are indeed moving in the right direction. And we are seeking to building out a framework to support a resilient and sustainable economy, understanding that the underpinning of any economy, the underpinning of any country, is its people. And we are saying to other public servants out there that there are opportunities for advancement in the service, that this government is open and attuned to possibilities as they arise, and that we are intending to reward those who show the necessary aptitude and who have prepared themselves for the position. And so they can look at our actions, look at our appointments, and realize that we are working in the best interest of the public service and in the best interest of the people of Nevis. Madam President, with those words, I would ask respectfully that this bill, which is shortly entitled the, trying now to find my bill, No? The bill, that's it. I found a copy. No? Shortly entitled, the Nevis Appropriation 2024 Bill 2023, that the bill be read a second time. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Honourable Member.